It's been signed, the European Commission have accepted it, and these detentions will now begin over the course of the next 24 hours. Yes, it's the one in, one out scheme from the government, this returns deal with France. But what exactly does it involve, and could it possibly stop the boats? Well, my name's Tom Harwood, and this is GB News Originals. Remember to click that subscribe button to stay completely up to date. Now, it was only a few weeks ago that the French president came over to the United Kingdom on a grand state visit. The red carpet was rolled out, the chariot ride up to Windsor Castle was there for him, and the banquets were laid on too. This was all, of course, to butter up the French president in signing this particular deal, a deal that the government had been working on pretty much from the word go. The ability to return small boat migrants to France. If such a deal could be agreed with no conditions, well, that would blow the Rwanda scheme out of the water. No longer would you have to fly people halfway around the world to get them gone from this country. You could just take them back across the channel. Clearly, had this been an option from the word go, had the government been able to simply pick up people from the middle of the channel, as the border force vessels do day after day, and take them back to France instead of taking them to the United Kingdom as they currently do, were that an option, the small boats crisis would be a crisis no longer. Clearly, that is the golden egg at the core of the Stop the Boats mission. If you were actually able to return small boat migrants to France, of course the safe country from which they came, well then this crisis would not be a crisis. So often people think that the small boats crisis is these small boats actually rocking up physically on the beach, evading the security of the British Coast Guard and Border Force vessels. But that's not the case. That hasn't been the case for years. Every single small boat is picked up by UK Border Force or by the RNLI. And when they are picked up, the problem is that they are just taken to the United Kingdom. Now, the government's been working on a deal to try and return them to France, and yet there are some crucial caveats to the deal that has been agreed. Some crucial caveats that could undermine the theory of the whole practice. Caveat number one. It's one in, one out. What does that mean? Well, for every small boat migrant that is returned to France, the United Kingdom will pick a different migrant, one who hasn't attempted to make the journey across by small boat, to resettle that migrant in the United Kingdom. The governments say that these will be migrants that are vetted, that have connections to the United Kingdom, that know people who reside in the United Kingdom. But people will clearly raise an eyebrow as to the efficacy of the idea that someone will be returned and will have a different migrant in their place. Will that really get the numbers down? Well, one of the arguments there is that people would not choose to get in the boat. If getting in the boat means that there is no way that they will get a chance to live in one of our plush hotels or gain refugee status in the United Kingdom. If they're going to be returned if they go on a boat, well, then they're better to stay onshore in France and wait to be swapped for someone who does choose to go on a boat. Now, you can see how that would stop the small boat crossings, perhaps after a time, once people picked up the idea that no one on those small boats would actually be accepted as a refugee in the United Kingdom, or even be granted asylum seeker status and put up in a hotel and be given all the bells and whistles that comes with. If the only way to do that was to not get on a boat, that would clearly dwindle down those boat numbers to nothing in quite short order. But then we get on to problem number two, the reason why none of that will work, at least in the short term. It's not going to be the case that people are immediately returned, are picked up halfway through the channel and returned to France. No, they'll still be picked up halfway through the channel just as soon as they get over that halfway point. But instead of being returned to France, they'll be taken to the United Kingdom. And of those, a small selection will be detained, and those will be the ones that are then returned to France. The government is not being open and not being honest about the numbers that it is going to send back. Media reports have been that perhaps it will be around 50 a week. Now that is around 5% of the total number coming over. So it's easy to see how if you have a 95% chance of business as usual coming across by small boat, it's not the biggest deterrent in the world. It's barely a deterrent at all. A 95% chance of business as usual? Well, that by every stretch of the imagination is business as normal. So, whilst the theory of the government's position of returning people to France is there for all to see, even the one-in, one-out portion of that deal, something that was raised by Robert Jenrick when he was immigration minister, is something that might be a possibility because it would so quickly stop those boats if there was no chance that coming across on small boat would land you in a hotel, get you into the black economy, or get you refugee status in short order. If there was no chance that would happen because of this returns agreement, then those boats would not come, very obviously. But that's not the system that is being implemented this week. The system that is being implemented this week is ambiguous. The government will not say how many people are being returned, and that's probably because it will be a vanishingly small proportion. And if, of course, it's only a vanishingly small proportion of people being returned, well, of course they're going to take their chances. Some of these people have travelled from sub-Saharan Africa to get to northern France. They're not just going to stop there. They're going to continue to try to get to the United Kingdom. Unless there is a 100% returns rate, it's very difficult to see how these numbers come down at all. Now, the government is trying to imply that it is going to ramp this scheme up, that it's going to build up those returns in order to then break that business model once and for all of the people smuggling gangs. But the French haven't said so. The European Commission hasn't said so. And there are some very worried southern European countries that are concerned on the impact of them if the United Kingdom is allowed to return all of those who come across in small boats. So we get to the fundamental crux of the matter. The United Kingdom and France weren't able to sign this agreement without the European Union's say-so. The Commission signed off on this deal this week, but what were the conditions attached to that? Well, we don't know what secret conditions may or may not have been attached to that. We do know that Greece, Spain, Italy have been concerned about the deal, and we can interpret from all of the noise around that perhaps the numbers being returned won't be as large as the government wants us to think. But this all fits into a wider context of concern in this country. Concern about the number of people in hotels, the young, undocumented men, hundreds of whom are dumped in communities week after week. Hotels that are requisitioned, HMOs that are requisitioned. People now being put in and amongst communities, and particularly women and children being very concerned about what that means for the scale and pace of change in their local communities. We're seeing that with the protests that are almost every weekend now. We're seeing that with real protest, but also concern up and down these communities. And something else that has been revealed in polling this week is that people, well, half of all people in this country think that getting migration down is not enough. That migration, frankly, needs to be eliminated in its entirety. Now, this is referring, of course, to legal rather than illegal migration. Of course, most people believe that there should be no illegal migration. The word illegal is rather a clue in that. But these two issues do often come conflated. Now, we spoke to a pollster from YouGov, the company behind this new poll, to see exactly what this all means. Where is the public sitting in terms of its opinion on the wider migration debate? Patrick, thanks for being with us this afternoon. This is quite a high level of support for quite a radical policy.
Good afternoon. Yes, it is indeed. It's quite a very interesting finding. We've spoken to around about 10,000 people in part of a really big look at public opinion on immigration as it is today. It's an issue, of course, which many people are concerned about, as we've discussed before. So we dug a little bit more into what kind of regimes people may support. Now, it is a big finding that 45% would support a complete stop of immigration and a removal of many recent migrants. However, it must also be said that around about the same proportion opposed such an idea, and that wasn't even the most popular suggestion either. 56% wanted a regime which had fewer immigrants coming in but still allowing more to come in. And it's interesting, really, as you say, there are some evidence of misconceptions around immigration into the UK at the minute, with it's around about 10 times actually more legal immigrants than illegal immigrants in the country right now, and the British public think that is those, well, perhaps not the relative numbers, but I think there are more illegal immigrants than legal immigrants. And also, when we probed a little bit deeper into the kinds of migrants, the kinds of people arriving to the country that Britons would support being removed, among those who did want such people removed, they really seem to be talking about illegal immigrants, people coming here as perhaps to claim benefits or to look for work without being legally entitled to do so. So I think there's a lot going on here. British public opinion on this topic is nuanced, it's complex, and it's evolving, and we're doing our best here to keep track of it.
It does appear as though, yes, there is a misconception about how much illegal immigration makes up of that overall migration figure, but I think it's fair to say from your findings that the main takeaway is that the majority of the British public want all immigration down. Is that right?
I think it is definitely fair to say that Britons at the minute believe that immigration has been too high. And there has been an evolving trend as well in our long-term tracking data that suggests increasing numbers of people think that immigration has done more harm than good to Britain in recent years. That figure is now approaching half of all Britons, and that is a change, and that is a reflection of how much of a concern immigration has become to the British public over recent years, and how they have been simply completely uninfatuated and dismissive of governments, plural, attempts to deal with this issue.
Patrick, it's often said that the British public is hopelessly misinformed when it comes to migration. As you say, you can point to various statistics about believing of the level of illegal migration compared to legal migration. But is there not just a fundamental narrative truth here that the British public have cottoned onto, and perhaps cottoned onto before the politicians? When we see very, very high migration, we see concern about migration much, much higher. When migration is lower, and countries that have substantially lowered their migration, like Denmark, for instance, they see concerns about migration on the floor. They see radical parties out of their parliament. When the politicians do what the public says, you actually sort of return to normalcy. I mean, is one of the problems here that the politicians have tried to be too clever by half and get one over the British public, who they don't understand, actually do get the nub of this issue?
I certainly will subscribe to the view that the British public do understand a lot, and they are cottoned on to a lot of things, and they do have a pretty accurate picture of what's going on in the country. Now, it's also true, if we sort of speak to wider research and some of the political science research, the British public are generally very good at noticing when things change. They may not have sort of a completely accurate handle, as we've sort of shown in this research, on, let's say, relative levels or absolute numbers, but they certainly are good. They detect when things move, and we saw this with inflation. The British public were telling us that there was going to be a cost of living crisis in our tracking data well before the words cost of living crisis even appeared in any newspaper article. So they're very good at noticing when things are going up, when things are coming down, and they will respond accordingly. And I do think it is the case that the British public have looked and got a sense and got a feel that immigration has been increasing, that there's more and more sort of small boat crossings, and they're not happy with that. And they simply want politicians to deal with this. They have not got the sense that politicians have at all managed to get a handle on the problem. And as I say, that's governments. It goes back a long way. And the frustration, I think, is clear to see from this polling data, and indeed many other sources of polling data on immigration that we have published.
Can't hoodwink the British public.
No.
Smarter than we look. Patrick English, thank you very much indeed, Director of Political Analytics at YouGov.
Well, what do you make of that? Both the issues of legal and illegal migration clearly politically potent in Britain today. Do get involved down in the comments section below, and remember to click that subscribe button to stay completely up to date on all the twists and turns of British migration policy.